the Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. The information contained in this podcast is based upon information available as of date of recording and will not be updated for any changes in law or regulation. Any information is not to be considered tax advice or legal advice and does not form an attorney-client relationship. Further, this podcast may be construed as attorney advertising. You should seek professional consultation for your individual tax and legal situation.
Welcome to Practical Tax. I'm Chip Franklin. This is tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. Steve, you know, it's interesting when we talk about, taxes and finance. Is there in the United States, is it the same in every state? Are there geographical differences?
Oh, sure, because majority of states have their own tax system and different states treat the tax law differently. So when you're giving tax advice, it's not just federal IRS. You have to consider the state or the states that you're involved with.
I know like Texas and Florida, they don't have income tax, and that's a big decision in a lot of people's, deciding where to move, right? And we have a lot of people from California going to Texas, right?
Oh, there's a tremendous drain of people out of California now, Chip. And, there's a number of states that don't have a state income tax. Of course, the one that we kind of joke about a little bit is Alaska. Alaska has a negative state income tax. They actually pay you to live there. But the joke is, do you want to live in a place where they pay you to live there?
All right. Our next guest is a certified public accountant, a certified fraud examiner, business advisory, and virtual CFO solutions. And I hope I get her last name right. Lydia Desnoyres. Did I get that right, Lydia?
Phenomenal. Spot on, Chip.
Well, thank you so much for being here. That's Steve Moskowitz on right above your head.
I see.
Boy, we probably have a lot to talk about. Before I was a tax attorney, I was a CPA.
You went over to, did you go to the dark side, or do you think you left the dark side?
Well, I didn't want to have to work as hard as you do, so I became an attorney instead.
All right. So both of you deal with tax strategy. So let's start with this question for both of you. One meeting with a client for the first time, what's your first question? And let me start with you, Lydia.
It depends on when they're calling. If they're calling on April 14th, my first question is, have you lost your mind? Just kidding. It's the first question, is what's your story, right? What's happened in the past? Do you typically owe, just to kind of get a feel for how, things have been in the past. Once I get to doing the work, and then, I kind of drive my questions on more planning and strategy for the future. But usually it's, hey, what's your scenario? What's going on?
Steve?
Well, we're very into planning. So what I like to do is, if somebody calls me on April 14th, I will explain to them that an extension is an extension of time to file, not an extension of time to pay. And then what I try to explain to the clients is that your tax return should merely be a summarization of a year's worth of tax planning. Because I look at the Fortune 500, and that's why I became a tax attorney. Because when I went to law school, I already had a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting. I was already a practicing CPA doing taxes. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to be the person to tell a client, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. I looked at the Fortune 500 and I said, how do those giant companies make all that profit and legally not pay taxes? That's what I want to learn how to do. And I want to do it for companies a lot smaller than the Fortune 500. So that's why I went to law school. And the bottom line is, there is so much here, because as we all know, the tax system is a system of incentives to get us to do things that they can't order us to do. That's where tax planning really comes from. So the bottom line is, I'm very, very into that with clients. And even if somebody calls me on April 14th and we file the extension, even then there's some things we can do. For example, with a lot of the retirement plans, there's over 20 different types. With a lot of them, you can set them up to the time of filing the return, including extension, which means that most of the time you have to write the check by December 31st, year one, to have the deduction in year one. With a lot of the pension plans, you can write the check in year two, set up in year two, and still deduct it in year one. But there's so much that can be done. So basically what I would say is, I talk to the client, listen to them, and also, what are their goals? Some people live life now, other people are retirement, other people, their kids. So even if I was representing twins, they might be identical financially, but have very, very different wants and needs. How about you, Lydia? How do you do it?
That's spot on in terms of the planning and stuff. Everybody's different, right? I actually had that example where you have two people who one person referred a coworker and they're same role, same salary, same everything, two different goals, two different outcomes, right? And so it's definitely important to understand what their goals are. There are some people who like big refunds, right? So they're okay with overpaying during the year because to them that's
Ask them if they'd be willing to make you an interest-free loan during the year. You give them money back.
Exactly. You try and have that conversation. Again, you have to know your audience. You have to know your clients, right? So I try and tell them, hey, look, you're literally just letting the government hold your money interest-free. Why not take that, put into a savings, there's so many other things you can do during the year. But again, some people are just like, well, you know what? I use it as a savings. When I get the refund, I pay my property taxes with it. I'm not disciplined enough or whatever the case may be.
Disciplined, that's the thing. It's because if they took the money, they'd spend it. That's it.
Right, exactly. So you got to know your audience. And then, obviously that will lend itself to a completely different conversation because maybe they need financial planning and financial coaching. But when we're talking about the tax strategy, it's understanding your audience. And like you said, having that conversation, that dialogue, understanding their comfort zone, understanding their, meeting them where they are. Right. And then, you eventually build that trust. Right. And then you can guide them and
another big thing.
They listen and take your advice.
Or are they planning on changing the marital status?
Exactly.
Right. I'm going to compliment you guys on something, and because it's something it reminded me of this conversation when I was in college. I had a girlfriend who was majoring in accounting, and I was a math major, but I just was something I could do. I didn't love it. She loved it, but it wasn't the numbers, and it bothered her when people said you're a numbers person. She goes, no, I'm a people person. And both you guys are. Both you guys represent yourselves real well. Lydia, I don't know you as well as I know Steve, but Steve has represented himself well over the years, and it's helped him because people, they're going to come. I mean, it's like a confessional, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so people have to trust you. They got to trust not just your acumen, but you, the essence of you. Right. And I think people forget that about this business.
Yeah.
Right?
I joke around after, when I was first in the trenches of tax season. And I don't do a lot of tax work anymore, by the way. But, I would joke around when I'm done and, collecting my fee. I'm like, all right, only a portion of this was for tax preparation. The rest was for a therapy session. Right?
Well, that's why our license is attorney and counselor at law.
There you go. You see, I don't have that, but sometimes you play therapy, but especially you develop these relationships. I was reflecting the other day, a client who just told me the other day, like, she's traveling because her son is getting his, the white coat ceremony. He's becoming a doctor or just graduated. Right. And I'm like, and my response was like, oh my God, were we just taking the driver's education credit for him? And so it's like, and I've never met this kid, but that's how you develop these relationships with the whole family. And it's like, oh my God, we went from getting the credit from him, getting his learner's permit to, the college credits for going to school. And then now he's no longer there. Now he's graduating. And it's like, the tax return tells a story. And so building that relationship and being a people person, that's really part of it. And I caught a little bit of your last, talk with your last guest about, communication and stuff and simplifying things, right?
So vitally important.
Right. Right. I've had clients who are like, Lydia, I'm really bummed. I'm really bummed that I owe the IRS, but Lydia, you really explained it in a way I understand. And now I know what to do so I don't have to owe them again.
Can I ask you guys, I want to ask you a question because most people think of financial planners and accountants and tax attorneys as when things are bad. But one of the things that are hard for people too is also rapid growth and how to deal with that. And I want to hear from both of you. And let me start with you, Steve. If a client comes in and, their business is just kicking butt, right? There's a lot of decisions to be made there, and it's an emotional thing too. Is that a difficult part of a business when they have rapid growth?
It can be a real fun part if you control it properly. But if you don't control it properly, it's like driving a race car real fast. That's fun, right, unless you crash it into a wall. So you have to be able to drive a race car differently than a street car. And what's so vitally important is, yes, a lot of times people will think of our professions as, oh, something bad happened and a lawyer showed up. but there could be something good. Chip, if you won the lottery, I bet I'd be your first call, and that would be something good.
You would. No, that's without a doubt. You would be. But Lydia, what about you? I mean, when you have a client that things are going really well, do you sometimes have to throw a little cold water on them and say, we got to think about when things aren't going to be going real well? Is that how it works?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously there's a way to communicate that without, kind of dampening their, people are excited. I mean, you go into business to grow, right? To build, have a profit. So you definitely want to continue to encourage that. But, to Steve's point, it's doing it in a sustainable way, right? So it's having that conversation is like, let's enjoy this growth and let's do it in a way that we can sustain it for a long period, right? Let's be strategic with what we do with that growth. How are we reinvesting into the business? Of course, reward yourself, give yourself a bonus for your hard work and stuff, but how are we reinvesting to make sure that the business can continue with that growth? And
that's important what you said there about rewarding oneself, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
Steve, we've talked about this, I think, in the past too, about, what good is it to be successful if you don't enjoy it along the way?
Of course. And also, I wouldn't think of it as cold water, Chip. I would think of it as advice and counsel. Let's go back to that race car. You drive the race car at a certain speed on the straightaway, but when you're taking that turn, you have to know how to hit the brake a little bit and go around so you don't flip on over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One more question, I guess, Lydia, for you, and I do this a lot, and I apologize, but I love to have intelligent women with their experience and acumen talk about women sometimes. Mm-hmm. Are there different financial strategies for single women in their 40s than would be for single men in their 40s?
I mean, I think there are different strategies for different people, right? Gender, where you are in life, can definitely play a factor, but it really depends on what your goals. So right back to what Stephen talked about is really understanding the goals. And we can expect them to be different depending on gender, where you are in life. Are you a single person who wants to stay single? Or are you a single person who wants to change that? Are you, do you plan on having kids or you don't want kids? I mean, so your strategy will change. The strategies will change depending on what the goal is. My business is tailored towards women-owned businesses and law firms because we do have unique challenges, right? That the male gender doesn't really experience. And so I love working with that. We have women, we're coming a long way. In one way, we're more supportive of one another. I think in the past, women have had that challenge of feeling, okay, well, there's not that many spaces available for us, so we have to compete with one another. And now we're letting go of that and we're supporting one another more intentionally, right? And so that plays a role in how we behave in business, right? How we present ourselves, how we show up in conference rooms, how we show up in our meetings, how we show up for our clients. So I work with women a lot on mindset, on self-limiting beliefs and overcoming those challenges that are both external, right? Things that, based on how other people behave towards us. And a lot of it, though, is internal, how we see ourselves and how we think we're being perceived. And so I do a lot of work with that. So definitely, I think there are some differences in strategies between genders and so.
You guys are great together because there's a yin and yang here. I mean, that doesn't happen. No, seriously, we have guests all the time and sometimes it connects, sometimes it doesn't. But this really does. I love your enthusiasm, and Steve, I can tell, loves talking about this. And will you come back, please?
I love talking about this, Chip.
I know you do. Will you come back again, please, Lydia? That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, be well. You have a great weekend, and I hope to talk to you again real soon. Okay.
Lovely. Have a great weekend. Nice to meet you
again. And we'll put your information up on the end of the show so people can contact you. Thank you so much again. You're going to love this one, Steve, because this again, another email. Okay. This guy, he says, I'm writing a book about golf. I am a writer. I've written before. I want to deduct my greens fees when I play. How many and how do I prove it to the IRS?
That's a toughie. And what happens is I know exactly what he's talking about. And what we have to do is overcome Internal Revenue Section 183 hobby loss rules. we have to show that what this person is doing is a business and not a hobby. There's a 9-point regulation that goes along with it. You don't need all 9 points. You don't have to have 5 out of 9. But what happens is this goes all the way back to 1969, when the Congress said that when you go into something that you had to make a profit. And the Congress said, no, no, no. The only thing you have to do is attempt to make a profit. And if you suffer a loss, you can still deduct it if it's a business. So you have to show the proper intent. And that's what the hobby loss rules are all about. And the 9-point regulation under the hobby loss rules to show that what you're doing for the activity is for a business. Now, the area that the writer is talking about is a more difficult area. If he said, I'm working on making a more efficient jackhammer, that would be a lot less suspicious, because nobody works on compression of a jackhammer.
You know what? He's going to call. I gave him the phone number. I said to call you, but I thought we'd read this one today.
Good,
so
good, I'm glad he does, because I'm going to have to go over this regulation with him. And when certain areas,
jackhammer,
golf, another one that you have to watch out for, guys that are writing a book on good restaurants, so they take their wives out to the restaurant every night. Another one is travel. People are going to Hawaii and Paris and all kinds of places, so someday they'll write a book. Now, there are books written about Hawaii and Paris and
golf
restaurants and all,
yeah,
but the rules here are pretty strict. I'm happy to go over that with him, because there's that 9-point regulation. If he wants to do it,
I love it.
He better become very familiar with that 9-point regulation.
Oh, it's good. So good. I gave him good advice. Our next guest is an aviation expert and a former commercial airline pilot. And as I speak today, I had a flight just canceled coming up in a few days. So Mike Hatten is with us here on Practical Tax with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Chip. Hi, Steve. It's very nice to be with you today. Thank you.
Great to have you here. So how many hours did you record in the air as a pilot?
I have approaching 28,000 hours total. That's both in helicopter in the military and in a previous career and at the airlines over the years.
Wow. A lot of stories in those 28,000 hours, I bet, right?
And some of them I can even tell.
Yeah, the airline industry right now is a big part of Steve's acumen to the travel industry. We were talking earlier to John Handlery from Handlery Hotel in a previous episode. When people, when business that book flights and, the whole, there's a million things we could talk about, from the points and, when people get to keep their points. I want to talk to Steve about that in a second. Does that count as income if I get, free flying and they give me points? But I guess the first question before we get to that is, what is the state of the airline industry right now? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it stronger? Is it hard to determine?
Well, it's a bit hard to determine, but I will say that it has gotten better. And I reference that by look at the cancellations and delays every day on the government website. They appear to be better. They tick up when there is a significant weather event somewhere in the country that slows down travel everywhere.
It's always been that way, though, right? Pretty much.
It's always been that way. But now that there's a shortage, it's more important, because what happens is you keep reserves in these larger bases. And now that there's not as many reserves, when something happens and a crew doesn't make it to their flight, they don't have someone to replace them.
I had with United, I flew United for a long time, and I had thousands of points. I can't, hundreds of thousands of points at one point. And so an accountant somewhere years ago, and I'd forgotten about it until I booked you today to ask Steve, how does the IRS deal with that, Steve, when, I fly a lot and I get these points and fly for free?
The IRS says that is not income, so enjoy them.
Was there pushback at some point on that?
They took a look at it, but the bottom line is they made the decision that it's not income, so you don't have to worry about it. And if you think about it, you did pay, you got those points because you paid for them. So when you're flying on that airline trip, you could basically pay for one flight or two flights. It's something you've paid for, and the IRS took the position that no, it's not income.
Does that go across the board? Like if I go to hotels a lot, they give me free hotel. I mean, to build points. That's all the IRS stays away from all that.
That's the position the IRS currently has. Yes.
That's good. Now, do you think that some of that pressure came from businesses that knew how important it was for that
Well,
loyalty?
I'm sure it did. Look, that's a major incentive for people. And it's all about loyalty. That Airline A wants you to fly with them. Well, you know what? Where you go, you could choose airline A, B, or C. Well, why do you choose airline A? Oh, well, I get that. Then you get the credit card from airline A. And now you say, well, I could take that trip to Paris and get a discount, get an upgrade, maybe get a free ticket. And yes, and remember, when we think of the IRS is like a cop, they're enforcement. The IRS does not make the law.
Right.
Congress makes the law. And business people have a significant effect on Congress people. And if you think about it, what's good for business is usually good for the American economy. I know a long, long time ago, there was a famous statement, what's good for General Motors is good for the country. But there's an awful lot of truth in that. You want businesses prosper because if they prosper, they hire more people who buy things, who pay taxes. In turn, if business is bad, business let people go. Now they don't pay any taxes, they're not making any money, and then they go on government support, and now the government's writing them a check. So yes, the government has a real strong interest in seeing business prosper.
Well, macroeconomics are sometimes hard for people to understand, and then people take advantage of that misunderstanding, in ways that either help their particular cause or business, whatever. A couple questions. How many planes are in the air right now here in the middle of a day on a Friday, Mike? Do you worry about sometimes the air travel or the air traffic controls and everybody, they do a good job?
I think they do an excellent job. There's been some interviews that I've conducted lately or that I've been interviewed about air traffic controller shortage, but they have safety, I call them fuses in place or circuit breakers. No, I think it's fair to say that safety is at a high level. The number of planes in the air, for instance, one airline, the airline that I work for, we have approximately 3,300 flights per day. Now they're not all in the air at once, but if you multiply that by the other airlines, you'll see quite a few in the air.
Chip, I've always felt a lot safer up in the air on an airplane than I did in the car on the way to the airport.
Yeah. But what about the pilots? Are they being overworked? And air traffic controllers, I've heard nightmare stories about that job. Has that gotten better?
I think it's gotten a little better for the controllers. Jacksonville, Florida seemed to be the control center that was the choke point for the East Coast. And the East Coast, believe it or not, affects the Midwest and the West Coast. And so the FAA has moved some controllers down there to relieve that. That's helped. Airlines have cut flights. I think American Airlines, I read, has cut 31,000 flights coming up between now and the end of the year to relieve some of the workload. And that's an incredible amount. Now, the true test will be, we have Labor Day coming, we have Thanksgiving coming, and we have Christmas coming. So this will tell us if the measures they've taken have been effective.
Are we going to see the return of discount air? Will that always pop up, or are we getting to a point where it's just, they seem to never last, right? Going back to Air Florida, there've been ones throughout my life. I can probably 24. What's the future of that? Does that continue to pop up?
It does continue to pop up. Some of the airlines are starting to mature, the discount airlines, as we go forward. However, in the last year, as a matter of fact, almost 1 year ago, Avelo Airlines, I don't know if you've heard of that, AVLO, they started, their first city was in California. They're headquartered in Houston. Andrew Levy, he's a longtime veteran of the airline industry. He founded that company and started it, and they are doing well.
What's the break point? I know in a hotel, they'll say we have to have 70% occupancy to make a profit. When I get on an airplane, sometimes I fly from San Diego to Oakland, and I've been on planes with 12 people. It's crazy, Steve. I'm sure you've done this before. Got on the small planes, and they tell the heavy people to sit like in a different seat because they're trying to balance the plane. That's not too encouraging. But how many people?
No, that happens,
right, Mike? It does, right?
Well,
on smaller
It
planes.
probably does. I know sometimes there's some tension when someone has to sit next to someone a little calorically challenged, as I like to call it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
That
I know
must
your
be a
previous
really
guest talked about
small
things
aircraft, Chip.
before, and it's just it's really a communication problem and how they handle it. Now,
When I
you
first
mentioned
started-
80% or 70% break-even factor for the hotels. When
Yeah.
I started in the early 90s at an airline, that was about 50%, just over 50% break-even for the airlines. As a matter of fact, Gordon Bethune famously said on TV, he was a Boeing executive and then a CEO at Continental Airlines, that the Boeing designed the airplane so the middle seats were to be empty for people's comfort. Now it's over 80% is the break-even factor
Wow.
for the airlines.
So has remote working, is that going to hurt travel? I think, I mean, we talk about it a lot on this show about, how, office space and, some of the positive parts of it, obviously being able to work at home and maybe not have to travel as much. I mean, this is not Zoom, but this is as you can tell, this is a pretty good format. You can do meetings here this way. It's not the same as shaking somebody's hand. I mean, Steve and I are getting together in a couple of weeks to see each other, have dinner. It's nice to be able to do that and to get on a plane and go do that. Are we seeing an effect of that pandemic surge in Zoom kind of business?
Well, we certainly did during the pandemic. Zoom traffic was way up.
Yeah.
Traffic didn't slow down during the pandemic. It came to a stop, and it panicked, the airlines. They didn't know what to do. And it returned as fast as it stopped. So they weren't prepared for that. And I don't fault them for that. It's just they took steps to save their companies, and they had no idea what was going to happen. I do know people, I have a couple of clients that I work with that tell me that every segment of their business is dependent upon shaking someone's hand face to face, and they got those contracts and they got those sales deals because that they were face to face. So they're itching to get out, and they are out. 80% of the business travel of 2019 has returned.
Good.
And Chip, another area to think about is remote workers that otherwise would have been sitting in an office all day now have the ability to travel someplace and do their work in Hawaii or Puerto Rico, or in a lot of countries are offering visas to come work here for a year or so.
Yeah. And one of the great ironies of all this is that it turns out an airplane might have been one of the safest places to be around people during COVID after all. The way they recycled the air and with the HEPA filters. And if you wore a mask, I mean, I've flown, knock on wood, I got it once, but for the most part, I flew a lot and I didn't get sick from an airplane. In fact, I think that somebody challenged, I think a United CEO or Delta challenged somebody to prove that somebody ever got sick or got COVID on an airplane. I don't know how you do that, but I mean, it does say, we do know that it's safe, and so you feel comfortable that we're moving forward, and for business travel is always the leading indicator of how the airlines are. And that's picked up 80%. Is the fuel cost, maybe in the cost, the only thing to keeping it getting back up over 100% maybe?
Fuel and labor are the most significant costs an airline faces, and fuel has ticked down a little bit. However, a lot of the CEOs, I know the CEO of the airline I worked for, he had a plan to deal with the fuel costs and to be profitable at fuel costs once that air traffic did return. As far as COVID, yes, the airlines are very safe. The filters on the newer generation airplanes, the new generation 737, 777, 787s, and the newer Airbus airplanes, the filters are HEPA filters. They are surgery suite quality from hospitals, and I'm very confident on that. One secret I did was I washed my hands every time I got a chance when I was on the airplane, and I was sick very little with colds and things like that.
Well, I mean, that's funny. That was one of the things that came out of the pandemic was flu disappeared because people were taking care of themselves. It's crazy.
Yes.
Mike, thank you so much, my friend. Maybe we'll catch you in the sky
Mike
someday. Get you back on and to tell us some of those stories of the 28,000 hours. That's the stuff I want to hear.
It's been a pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thank you both.
Be well. Thank you so much. Again, Mike Hatten, aviation expert, nice enough to join us here on Practical Tax. That was fun, Steve.
All great guests.
Yeah. You be well. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks.
Okay, that's Steve Moskowitz, tax attorney. This is Practical Tax. Be well.
The Practical Tax Podcast with tax attorney Steve Moskowitz.